Hi, my name is Thora, or at least that's the name they gave me. I served my country, I came home, and then my own family asked me to die. Not metaphorically, they wanted my heart, literally, to keep my brother alive. But the worst part wasn't the request. It was discovering I was never their daughter at all, adopted without consent, lied to since birth, watched, recorded, groomed to be a donor. Now tell me, if your entire life was built on a lie, how do you even begin to take it back? When I stepped off the bus and onto the cracked pavement of my childhood street, the leaves crunching beneath my boots felt louder than they should have. The air in suburban Ohio smelled the same: wet bark, distant chimneys, and something synthetic like fresh paint trying to hide old damage. But the house itself, it looked like a postcard sent from a lie. The shutters were still blue and the porch swing still groaned in the wind, but it felt like a movie set, hollow behind the props. I hadn't been back since my last tour ended, and the silence that greeted me wasn't just absence, it was curated, controlled. Dad opened the door before I even knocked. "Thora," he said, his voice flat and forced. "You look healthy." Healthy, not strong, not missed, just biologically intact. Mom appeared behind him, brushing her hands on a dish towel, though I doubted she'd been cooking. She offered a brief smile, tight, like it hurt her. Her eyes flitted past me, never quite landing. Inside, the house was spotless, too spotless, like it had been sterilized instead of cleaned. Even the framed photos on the walls looked arranged by a stranger. I paused at one, Silas, my older brother, pale and gaunt in a graduation robe. I couldn't remember if I'd been at that ceremony. "I made up the guest room," Mom said, gesturing toward the hallway. I nodded. "Thanks." We sat for dinner like strangers on a blind date. No one mentioned the military. No one asked why I'd come home now. Small talk rolled off the table like pebbles down a drain, until I noticed the manila envelope on the counter. It was half-tucked beneath a stack of napkins, but the word viability stood out in bold print. Something tightened in my stomach. Later, after the dishes were cleared, Dad asked if we could talk, just the two of us. We sat in the living room, the kind where no one ever really lives. The air was too still, the cushions too firm. He folded his hands and looked at me with the expression he used when I was 7 and broke the neighbor's window. "Silas's condition is worsening," he began. "I figured," I said quietly. "He's on the transplant list, but it's unlikely he'll get a heart in time." I nodded, waiting for the part where I was supposed to offer sympathy or a donation to some foundation. Instead, he said, "We've been exploring all options. And there is one unconventional path." Mom appeared in the doorway like she'd been summoned by cue. She didn't speak, just nodded at him. Dad's voice dropped. "We want you to consider donating your heart." I blinked. "My heart?" "To Silas," he clarified, like that would help. "You mean when I die?" He shook his head. "No. Now. There's a procedure. Experimental, but viable. The donor remains alive in a supportive state." "A supportive state," I repeated, tasting the absurdity. "You want me to give him my heart and just exist as what? A vegetable?" "It's not like that," Mom said. "It's a gift, a sacrifice, one only a sister can make." I stared at them. "You're serious?" "Thora," Dad said, his eyes glinting. "You've always been stronger than the rest of us. You don't have to die. Just make peace with letting go." Something inside me splintered. I stood abruptly, the walls closing in. "Who else have you asked?" I hissed. They didn't answer. Because there was no one else. I left the room without another word. On the porch, the cold hit me like a slap. The swing creaked behind me, but I didn't sit. I stared out at the tree line, black against a purple sky. The wind tangled my hair. My breath came out shaky, not from the cold, but from something deeper. "They don't see me as family," I whispered. "I'm a spare part." My phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification. PTSD support session reminder. I deleted it without reading. No one's saving me. That night, I dreamed of someone calling my name, but it wasn't my mother's voice. The morning light crept through the sheer curtains like it had no idea what happened the night before. I opened my eyes to the ceiling I didn't recognize anymore, the same ceiling I'd grown up under, but now it felt like a stranger hovering above me. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and sat still for a moment, listening. The house was quiet, almost performatively so. The kind of silence that isn't natural, like a waiting room right before someone calls your name for something you don't want to hear. My boots echoed slightly on the hardwood floor as I made my way to the kitchen. Everything was arranged too perfectly. The coffee mugs aligned like soldiers, the fridge spotless, like no one actually lived here. I reached for the coffee pot and froze. There it was. A small red blinking light perched in the corner of the ceiling, nestled within a fake smoke detector. It was watching me. I scanned the room again, this time like I would a hostile perimeter. There, another one tucked into the bookshelf, and one more above the hallway light fixture. I counted 4 before I stopped. I wasn't in a home anymore. I was in a monitored zone. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. A few minutes later, Coraline wandered in, robes flowing like she'd floated out of a ghost story. Her eyes flicked toward me and then to the corner where one of the cameras blinked gently. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said too brightly. I pointed up at the fake smoke detector. "New fire system?" She smiled thinly. "Oh, those security measures. You know, with you back and everything. Just want to keep everyone safe." "Safe from what?" I asked. Her face didn't change. "The world's not like it used to be." Merrick walked in behind her and clapped his hand on my shoulder. "Just making sure you're safe while you're home." That word again. Safe. As if that's what this was. Later that morning, I headed toward the study to try and get some internet connection for my work files, some excuse to keep me from boiling over. The room had barely changed since I was a teenager. The same dusty old chair, the same shelves filled with outdated encyclopedias. But on the desk, something new, an envelope marked confidential, health insurance plan. I don't know what pulled me toward it, but I opened it before I could think better of it. Inside, papers rustled under my fingertips, clinical printouts, policy declarations, donor information. My heart stalled. It was Silas's policy, a private donor clause, and a clear stipulation. Primary donor identified and confirmed, 8 months prior. 8 months ago. My name wasn't anywhere. In fact, a different name was listed, blacked out in later revisions but faintly visible beneath the heavy marker lines. They never planned to ask me. They planned to take. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the page. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but instinct said I needed evidence, proof, just in case. When I turned around, Merrick was in the doorway. "Looking for something?" he asked casually. "Just trying to get some reception," I said. He didn't press. He didn't need to. The tension hung there between us like a loaded weapon. Back in the living room, Silas sat with a blanket around his shoulders, sipping soup like a frail king. Coraline fed him like he was a child. His eyes locked on me as I walked in. "It's just a heart, Thora," he said, voice slow and deliberate. "You don't even use it the way we do." Coraline hushed him, brushing his hair back gently, but she didn't correct him. Didn't disagree. "I'm not doing this," I said, louder than I meant to. Merrick's voice snapped in from the hallway. "You're acting hysterical." That word again, like I was just emotional, irrational. The way people talk to women to get them to stop being loud. That night, Coraline knocked softly on my bedroom door. "I wanted you to hear it from me," she whispered. "You were adopted. Special circumstances. It doesn't mean you're not family." I didn't reply. I waited for her steps to fade down the hallway, then dragged a chair across the room and jammed it under the doorknob. I opened my laptop and found the site for a DNA testing service. Fingers trembling, I filled out the information. As I hit send, I stared at the confirmation screen for a long time. If I was never truly their daughter, maybe I wasn't their sister either. The envelope was thin, white, and utterly terrifying. It arrived just after 8 in the morning, slipping from the mailman's hand into mine like it carried something heavier than paper, like it carried a past I didn't ask for and a truth I wasn't ready to see. I stood in the doorway, frozen as the rain soaked the porch and misted against my boots. I should have opened it right then. But instead, I walked back into the house, one deliberate step at a time, as though the ground would split if I moved too fast. My hands trembled, knuckles tight around the envelope's edge. I passed the living room where Coraline sat knitting something gray and shapeless. She didn't look up. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the envelope like it might explode. Then, with the kind of calm that only comes after total emotional numbness, I tore it open. 3 lines. That's all it took to dismantle 32 years of identity. Biological relationship, none. Match, 0% with listed familial references. Subject. Name, Ruth Marin. My name, my real name. Or at least the one I was born with. My breath caught. The ceiling pulsed. My hands went cold. I reread it once, then again. I held it up to the light like I was expecting to find a joke hidden in the paper fibers. But there it was. Ruth Marin. No connection to Merrick, Coraline, or Silas. Not legally, not genetically, not at all. I didn't cry. My body didn't know how. The grief was too big for tears. It was the kind of pain that turned bone to dust. I sat there for what felt like hours, the letter clutched in my hands, when my phone buzzed. It was the number from the private DNA testing company. I answered it before I could think. Ms. Thora, excuse me, Ms. Marin? The voice was soft, careful. We wanted to follow up. Your test flagged an adoption code, and there's a note in the National Registry. Your birth mother's name was Elise Marin. I whispered it back, like a prayer I didn't understand. Elise Marin. She was a nurse. Records indicate she died under suspicious circumstances in 1995. She was employed at Grafton General Hospital, same place where Silas Merrick was born. A nurse. A hospital. The same hospital where my so-called brother entered the world. My blood ran colder than the Ohio rain tapping on the window. The woman continued. She left behind some sealed documentation. We don't have access to it, but the flag indicates that she submitted whistleblower material. It was never made public. The call ended. I didn't remember saying goodbye. The rest of the morning passed in snapshots. The test result on the desk. My hands pressing against my temples. The echo of the nurse's name in my mind. When I emerged from the bedroom, Coraline was still in her chair. The same rows of yarn stretched between her fingers. Merrick was in the hallway, pretending not to see me. Silas was propped up in the recliner like a prince, sipping his soup with smug detachment. I held the envelope, but no one asked about it. That silence, it was louder than any scream. They knew. They had always known. And now, so did I. I took my seat at the kitchen table, the one I used to think was mine, and laid the paper down. They didn't glance at it, didn't even blink. I was a ghost in my own life. That's when the truth finally clicked into place. Not just the DNA, not just the paperwork, but everything, every cold glance, every time Coraline handed Silas the last piece of cake, every time Merrick praised my military service but never asked how I slept at night, every photo on the mantle that didn't include me. I realized they never looked at me the way families do. They looked at me like I was temporary, replaceable. I whispered the words under my breath. You don't own me. No one responded. I didn't expect them to. That night, I sat on my bed and opened my laptop. My military credentials gave me access to certain legal services. I clicked the tab for veteran legal assistance and began filling out a request for support regarding adoption records and guardianship fraud. But I didn't stop there. My fingers moved faster than my mind, guided by some instinct that said, "Don't look back." I filed a request for sealed hospital documents related to whistleblower activity. I added a second claim under identity deception. I clicked Submit. I stared at the screen, the words Ruth Marin reflecting back at me like a stranger in the mirror. I was born Ruth Marin, and I was done being their Thora. The coffee shop was modest, nestled between a dry cleaner and a thrift store, with the kind of soft jazz that tried to make you forget how bitter the coffee really was. I sat near the window, rain tapping against the glass like fingers reminding me I could still walk away. But I didn't. I waited. My hands shook slightly around the ceramic cup, not from nerves but anticipation. Then she walked in. Valerie was older than I expected, her gait slow but deliberate. She wore a navy cardigan and a name tag from another life that read, R.N. Valerie H. 1978 to 2009. She glanced around before settling into the chair across from me, eyes sharp, scanning, like she was back on a hospital floor. "You look just like her," she said, not as a compliment, but a confession. My throat tightened. "Ruth Marin?" She nodded, then reached into her purse and pulled out a weathered notebook. Pages curled, ink fading, but the secrets inside still screamed. She kept records, couldn't stop herself. Said if something happened to her, someone needed to know. I opened the notebook slowly. Inside were dates, patient codes, handwritten notes about donors, real and forged. My name, my old name, Ruth Marin Jr., appeared next to a consent line. The word falsified was written in red ink beside it. I stared at the page so long I forgot to blink. Valerie leaned in. "Your mother didn't just disappear, she was pushed out. She challenged too many procedures." Said the consent forms were being altered for high-priority patients, wealthy ones. I whispered, "And she died." "In a car accident," Valerie replied, her voice cracking. "But the brakes had been checked the day before. She told me, if I go, it won't be an accident." I pressed the notebook to my chest. My heart thudded against it like it was trying to warn me. Then she told me something that shattered what little restraint I had left. "Before your adopted father came for you, he was looking for a liver, not a heart. He contacted someone I knew, someone on the edge of legality." The word adopted echoed. "He tried the black market first?" I asked, my voice hollow. Valerie hesitated, then nodded. "When it didn't work, he called in a favor at the hospital. You were Plan B." Plan B? I left the coffee shop shaking. My boots slapped puddles, splashing cold water up my calves. The sky felt closer, heavier. I stopped at a street lamp and dialed Coraline. She picked up. No greeting, just silence. "I know everything," I said, gripping my phone like it might explode. Still silence. "Forged consent, black market donors, Ruth Marin." She inhaled, slow and sharp. "Whatever you're chasing, leave it alone." "No," I replied. "If you don't speak the truth, I will." There was a pause, then the line went dead. She didn't deny it. That was all the confirmation I needed. Back at the house, I went to the spare room, my makeshift refuge, and opened my laptop. I created a folder labeled Truth Files. Inside, I started typing Valerie's notes, my DNA test, my military logs, everything. Each word was a brick in the wall I was building to keep them out, and finally, to keep myself in. They had built a lie. I would build a truth sharp enough to cut it down. I woke up with the Boston morning light slipping through the blinds, painting the room in soft gold. The clarity startled me. Today was about closing chapters, owning my truth, no longer hiding behind the name given to me by people who never really knew me. I pulled on a button-down shirt and headed straight to the notary's office. My hands didn't tremble anymore, not with fear, but with anticipation. The clerk asked for my name. I looked at her and answered, Ruth Marin. She repeated it, nice and loud. Ruth Marin. The papers were ready. I signed, sealing the decision in ink, legal and irreversible. The weight that lifted from my chest was sudden, a tangible exhale in the shape of a name. Later, I sat at a small table in a cafe across from the Veterans Affairs building and opened my phone. With one tap, I posted to my private military Facebook group. I'm not who they said I was, and I don't owe them my body. My phone buzzed right away. Messages flooded in. We're here for you. Thank you for telling the truth. Let me know if you need help. For the first time since the invitation to become their donor, I felt like I belonged somewhere. A chosen family, not defined by DNA, but by solidarity. But the fatherly wounds were still open. That afternoon, my real home loomed behind me in silence. The doorbell bothered me, but I answered. It was a plain white envelope, thick and ledger-sized. There was no return address. Inside, a psychiatric evaluation, dated when I was 9. Conduct disorder, marked in bold, notes about attention-seeking and behavioral instability. A rush of cold fury coursed through me. How dare they? They fabricated a mental illness to discredit me, built a narrative of fear around me before I even trusted myself. I confronted Merrick in the living room as he scrolled through the news on TV. That evaluation, I said, voice steady, was made up when I was 9. He paused, hand hovering over the remote. You've always been unpredictable. You frightened the family. We did what we had to. Protect everyone. I stared at him until he looked away. I called my lawyer from my veteran resources. By evening, I had drafted a folder, DNA proof, testimony from Valerie, copies of the insurance documents, and now this psychiatry report, ready for court, ready for truth. The will followed. I dissociated myself from my biological family legally, designating all my benefits to a veterans charity. They wanted a donor. They got a witness. That night, I set the digital recorder in my bedroom and whispered, "This is for the record." The hospital was quieter than I remembered. Not silent. Hospitals are never silent. But it had the heavy hush of a place holding its breath. The kind of quiet where secrets didn't just linger. They haunted. I pulled into the employee lot behind St. Agatha Memorial, my headlights slicing through the foggy Ohio night. I wore my old field jacket and combat boots, a nod to familiarity. The clerk at the back entrance glanced up from his desk, his eyes flicking between me and the ID I slid across the counter. Military transfer records, I said simply. He didn't ask questions, just buzzed the door and handed me a guest badge. Maybe I looked too tired to lie, or maybe he saw enough soldiers pass through these halls to know when not to pry. The archive room was exactly where I remembered it, sublevel 2, beneath oncology, through a door that stuck halfway open. It smelled like bleach and paper rot. I stepped inside, flipping the switch on my flashlight. Rows upon rows of cabinets lined the space, some labeled with years, others with departments long since shut down. It didn't take long to find the 2005 files. Folder after folder. So many names, most of them probably forgotten. But then, like an accusation, I saw mine. Marin Ruth. My hand hovered over it. Inside was a single form. Organ donor consent, dated and signed by me. Only I'd never signed it. The signature was close, almost perfect. But the slant was wrong. The pressure too uniform. A forged document, time-stamped 2 months before I'd shipped out for basic training. I was 17 at the time, legally a minor. My stomach flipped. I couldn't breathe. How long had this been sitting here, just waiting for the right moment? I stepped back, dizzy. My flashlight beam trembled as it scanned the cabinet again. And that's when I noticed it. Taped underneath the drawer was a small black flash drive. The label, handwritten in Sharpie, read, "My hands were shaking when I slid it into my coat pocket." Back in my car, I didn't even wait to start the engine. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The password prompt blinked at me like a dare. I tried my birth date. It opened. Files poured across the screen, dozens of them. Scans, spreadsheets, emails. Some were from the hospital's Board of Ethics, others from internal audits marked private. I clicked through them one by one, the bile rising in my throat with every line I read. It was all here. Names of hospital staff, payment trails from shadowy donors, a pattern of illegal consents obtained from orphans, undocumented patients, the poor, anyone who couldn't fight back. And there, over and over, was my mother's name, Marin, E., flagged in bold, annotated in red. Non-compliant. Warned. Escalating concern. She'd tried to stop it. The last file was a memo. No header. Just text. Typed. Deliberate. Final. If this reaches Ruth, I want her to know she was not abandoned. She was taken. I tried to keep you safe. I tried to tell the truth. They made me disappear, but I left you what I could, finish what I couldn't. I stared at the screen, blinking away the heat behind my eyes. This wasn't a hospital. It was a machine. One that chewed through the vulnerable and came back for seconds. I downloaded everything, copied backups to a private cloud and 2 separate thumb drives. Then I slid the original back into the envelope and drove. It was 2:43 a.m. when I reached my lawyer's office. I parked illegally and didn't care. They forged my body. They buried my mother's name. Now I would burn their lies to the ground. I pulled out my phone and started a group message. Valerie, my lawyer, and the journalist who'd been waiting for proof. Tomorrow, we go public. The television was already on when I stepped into the VA community center. I hadn't touched the remote. The room was empty, but the screen blared loud enough to feel like a slap. My daughter, Thora, is very sick, Coraline said, her voice trembling with just the right hint of controlled grief. She suffered in silence for years since her deployment. We've tried to help her, but now she's spreading these painful, delusional accusations. I froze in place, hands gripping the chair back in front of me. The camera panned to her wet cheeks. Not a single tear fell. We never asked her for anything. That story about her heart, it's a symptom of her trauma. My husband and I only want her to get help. She didn't just twist the knife, she dipped it in honey first. By noon, my inbox had exploded. Angry messages, disbelief from acquaintances, even veterans forums where I used to feel safe filled with comments like, "She's making soldiers look bad," and "This is why PTSD ruins families." I wanted to scream. Instead, I closed the laptop, stood tall, and whispered, "Let them underestimate me." Valerie met me later that afternoon, eyes downcast, hands shaking around a paper coffee cup. "There's something I should have told you sooner," she said, sitting across from me in a corner booth of the cafe. I leaned forward. "What is it?" "The Merrick Foundation. Years ago, they gave me a grant for nursing school, said it was in your mother's memory, but it wasn't a scholarship. It was hush money. I realize that now." The breath left my lungs like a punch. "You took money from them?" "I didn't know what they'd done, Ruth. Back then, your mother, your real mother, was just a name I heard in the break room. I thought they were honoring her, but I never asked the right questions." Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." I believed her. That was the worst part. "It's not just about me anymore," I told her. "It's about every girl they bought into silence." Her eyes welled up, but she nodded. Back at the lawyer's office, my fingers tapped out a new strategy. Coraline wanted to weaponize mental illness against me. Fine. I'd file for an injunction, make her justify the sudden public concern about my health, after 30 years of cold distance. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to rage. I would respond with facts and fire. That night, I recorded the video in a single take. The desk lamp cast long shadows, and the words came from a place deeper than anger. I was labeled sick to keep me silent. They told the world I was broken. They used my service, my trauma, as a shield for their cruelty. I looked straight into the camera. I am not sick. I am a soldier. I uploaded it just after midnight. By morning, quiet voices started to rise. Fellow veterans, foster kids, trauma survivors, people who'd been silenced too. They commented, they shared, they messaged, not loud, not viral, but steady and real. As the sun cracked through the blinds the next morning, I scrolled through the comments, heart beating slow and even. She wanted the world to think I was broken, I whispered. On screen, the video froze on my final line. My name is Ruth Marin, and I remember everything. The courthouse doors felt heavy beneath my fingers. I paused for a moment, not to steady my nerves, but to absorb the gravity of what was about to unfold. I'd walked in here as Thora, the daughter. Now I walked in as Ruth Marin, the woman who dared to name the lies that tethered her. My lawyer and I moved quietly through the metal detectors. The courtroom was already buzzing, reporters, locals, cameras trained like hawks. In the back row, I spotted them. Merrick with a look like someone who'd just stepped through a storm, Coraline's face pale and unreadable, and Silas fidgeting next to them, no shield but a blank expression. I closed my eyes for a second, drawing a steady breath. This wasn't about pleading. It was about testifying, against the lie, against their control. When the judge called my name, the echoes seemed almost ceremonial. One deep exhale before I spoke, my voice low, measured. The evidence came out in waves. My DNA results showed 0% familial link. A stack of documents proved the forged consent, the insurance plan, the secret recordings. I watched Merrick's jaw tighten as the courtroom murmured. Even the press was on my side. Independent investigators came forward, confirming anonymized tips about discrepancies in hospital logs, financial records I wasn't privy to. Their faces were frozen in disbelief. Coraline's mask began to crack. On the stand, Coraline's composure dissolved. I thought I was protecting everyone, she whispered through tears. I thought it was love. The words tore at me. A mother, broken by her own protective rage. The judge called a recess, and everything slowed. Shuffling feet, whispered exhalations, the sound of my own heart connecting the cracked pieces. Outside, the sun felt foreign and warm. Reporters surged forward as I stepped down, cameras flashing. I lifted my head, my new name on my lips. I reclaimed my name, I said, voice firm. I reclaimed my life. The crowd, veterans, supporters, people who'd watched in silence, began to applaud, steady and sincere. For the first time in my life, a silence held me, not one of erasure, but one of recognition. That afternoon, as I settled into the front seat of a waiting car, the weight drained from me. The name on the courthouse file wasn't just legal, it was liberation. They tried to erase me, I murmured to the empty leather seat. Instead, I erased them from my story. The cardboard flaps gave way with a gentle crinkle as I pulled open the final box. My new apartment in Asheville was still half empty, echoing with the kind of silence that didn't judge or expect. I liked it that way. Nestled between old journals and an unopened envelope from the VA was something I hadn't expected, a letter. The envelope bore the sterile, government-issue logo of the National Transplant Center. I paused, unsure if I wanted to know what waited inside, but my hands moved anyway. The letter was handwritten in flowing, careful script. No name I recognized signed the page. Dear donor family, it began. I don't know how to begin a thank you that will never be enough. Your loss gave me life. I breathe because of her heart. I carry her heartbeat with mine. I sat down slowly. My pulse pounded in my ears. Her heart? There was only one her that could mean Coraline. The letter continued, describing the woman's illness, her months on a transplant list, her children, and how the surgery had saved her. I don't know anything about the donor, only that the doctors said it was a direct match and came sooner than expected. I wake up every morning and I promise, whoever she was, she didn't leave in vain. I pressed the page against my chest. My heartbeat trembled against the ink. In some strange, tangled way, Coraline had saved someone. Not by intention, not by love, but by biology. And maybe, just maybe, that counted for something. I cried, but not for her. I cried for the girl under the stairs, whispering for a mother who never came. I cried for the soldier who thought silence made her strong. I cried for Ruth Marin, hidden in the shadows of a name that never belonged to her. Forgiveness wasn't coming. Not in the way stories like to sell it. There was no neat bow, no sudden peace. But there was a letting go. A choice to stop feeding the fire with my own oxygen. They couldn't define me anymore. Not Merrick with his contracts, not Coraline with her ghost truths, not Silas with his hollow eyes. I wasn't theirs to ruin. 2 weeks later, I stepped into the meeting room at the local VA center. Folding chairs in a circle, a pot of weak coffee brewing, and stories hanging thick in the air before anyone said a word. "Welcome," the group leader smiled. "We hear you used to write reports in the field." I nodded. "Now I write something else." I began volunteering weekly. No therapy speak, no forced healing. Just words, stories, scars turned into sentences, rage turned into rhythm. One young recruit lingered behind one evening. Barely 20, posture straight, but fingers twitching. "You're Ruth, right?" she asked. "I am." "You're the reason I stayed in," she said. "When it got too dark, I found your video." I didn't ask what part of the story she meant. I just smiled and offered her a seat. That night, back home, I stood in front of the mirror. Not the kind you glance at, the kind you really look into. Lines were forming beneath my eyes. My shoulders no longer carried tension like armor. I saw the woman who had faced a family that treated her like a spare part, and won, and she smiled at me first. My fingers reached for a pen. I signed the last page of a manuscript I'd been too scared to finish. Underneath it, I wrote, "My name is Ruth Marin. If you're still searching for your voice, start by telling the truth." I walked to the window and pushed it open. The autumn wind rustled the single page left on my desk, because truth outlives blood, names, and even silence. Autumn light filtered softly through the chapel-like windows of the new event space downtown, bathing everyone in gentle gold as the mural was unveiled. I stood to the side, heart racing almost in disbelief. There it was. "Heroes Come Home," painted in rich colors and bold letters, featuring my silhouette amid others who served. Beneath that, engraved in delicate script, Ruth Marin, truth teller. Neighbors gathered, veterans I barely recognized nodded, and old friends Rusty and Claire pushed through the crowd to embrace me. Rusty's grip said, "You are seen," and Claire's eyes held, "You are home." I blinked back tears. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It lived here, in the brick and paint, in their hearts. Later, in my quiet living room, the air smelled of cinnamon and early evening. I found a plain envelope on my doorstep with no return address, my name the only clue. Inside, 4 pages from a stranger in rural Kentucky, a woman who'd watched my video months ago. She'd struggled with rejection, tears brimming in her eyes as she wrote how I helped her ask her birth mother to meet for the first time. She ended with, "Your courage gave me the strength to ask for an answer I never knew I needed." Sitting by my desk, the letter pressed to my chest, I realized how wide ripples can travel when you dare to speak. The mural wasn't just a mark of what I'd survived. It was a spark passed on to others carrying silent wounds. That evening, I hosted a live stream workshop from my home office. Stories We Carry. Veterans and adoptees joined from living rooms across the country. I read excerpts of my journey, fear, discovery, reclamation. Some held back tears, others typed in support. The woman from Kentucky popped up, smiling, tears shining through pixels as she whispered, "Thank you." When the session ended, I said, "Our pain doesn't define us, our voices do." In the quiet that followed, I felt a shift, like dousing winter under something warm and living. Later, I walked to my mirror and studied the person reflected back. There she was, older, softer, marked by pain and yet holding peace. She wasn't rebuilding a life. She'd grown one. With a pen, I finished the last page of my first memoir draft. Below the closing lines, I signed Ruth Marin and added a note to readers. If you're still searching for your voice, start by telling the truth. I stepped to the window and watched leaves drift past the mural I'd helped bring to life. I lost a family I never belonged to and found a whole world waiting to hold me instead. The house felt quieter than usual that evening. Just me, the hum of a small lamp, and a silence I was finally learning to accept. I sat at our worn kitchen table, one hand holding a mug of chamomile tea, the other sifting through letters from those I'd met over the past months. Veterans, adoptees, strangers whose stories found strength in mine. I paused on one envelope, the paper soft under my fingers, and my breath hitched. It was addressed simply, to Ruth. Inside was a letter written in steady, practiced script. My daughter, I see you, and I am sorry. Those 8 words passed through me like sunlight after a storm. My birth mother, Isolde, had finally spoken. After 32 years of silence, she acknowledged me. The sorrow and longing mingled in my chest. Should I write back? Could I even find the words? I brought the letter to my desk and stared at it until the tea went cold. Then I found my pen and wrote, "You never abandoned me. You were just lost. I forgive the quiet." The tears blurred the ink, not of anger but starting to heal. I didn't say I love you. That felt too soon. This was simply recognition and something like kinship. I folded the note, pressing it gently onto my wooden desk, then laid it into the small wooden box we'd nicknamed the memory box, surrounded by old photos, letters, and keepsakes. It felt heavy, sacred. From across the hallway came laughter, veterans gathering upstairs around coffee cups and story swaps. For the first time, that sound didn't feel distant or like an echo. It felt like home. I whispered to myself in the empty quiet, "This isn't just home, it's healing." I stood and went to the window. Outside, the late autumn light dripped across the leaves. I traced their fading reds and golds with my eyes, feeling the weight of loss lighten just a bit. By the mantel, the memory box glowed in the lamplight. I touched the carved wood, breathing in the sense of past and promise. At last, my silence, my chosen silence, felt sacred. I stood inside the municipal auditorium in Asheville under warm, amber lighting that felt like a benediction. The seats were filled with friends, neighbors, veterans, fellow adoptees, and strangers who had become allies. My lawyer handed me the final document, a legal certificate affirming my name, Ruth Marin H. Langford, a name finally mine, tried and true. When the clerk called it aloud, Ruth Marin H. Langford, the room broke into applause, not the polite kind. These were cheers from people who'd watched me rise, from people who believed in truth, in quiet courage, in what real healing looks like. My heart braced, and then it opened, like a sunrise stepping over a dark ridge. The weight of Thora lifted away in that single breath of recognition. After the ceremony, I walked through a crowd that reached out to touch my arm, squeeze my shoulder, nod in understanding. One woman, eyes bright, handed me a folded card. Inside, her shaky handwriting read, "Because you spoke, I no longer feel alone." She said it quietly, but by the time I returned home, tears had burned their tracks on both sides of my face. Those small moments, those quiet affirmations, they meant more than judgment ever could. That night, in the hush of my cozy apartment, I opened my laptop. The blank page blinked at me. I began to type. Another chapter, this one for others. A free anthology featuring stories of survivors and veterans who had endured in silence. I wrote with the rhythm of truth, of stories that deserved breath. I thought of the journey here, from a girl hiding behind a false name to a woman telling the world who she really is. I closed my eyes and whispered. They burned me, but I rose, brighter. The screen glowed back with my words, steady and alive. Outside, the mural I had helped bring to life gleamed in the sunset, its colors vibrant against fading autumn skies. I walked to it, barefoot on the cool grass, and let the memory of every step sink in. I will live as the woman who told the truth, and that was enough fire to forge a lifetime. Some fires destroy, but others forge us into who we're meant to become. I used to believe silence protected me, but what I've learned is that silence only serves those who fear the truth. I told my story not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. If you're someone who's been made to feel voiceless, I hope this reminds you. Your story matters. Your truth holds power. And healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It means facing it and choosing who you become after. In a world that often rewards silence, what would happen if more of us chose to speak? Would families change? Would systems listen? Or would we finally begin building the kind of future we deserve? Now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? Did this story speak to you? If it did, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me what moment struck your heart the most. And if it didn't, that's okay too. Share why and where you were when you watched it. Let's start a conversation. Because stories don't end when the video does. They live on in the people who carry them. If this video touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel. That's how you'll stay connected and never miss the next story that might just be the one you needed to hear.